Hello friends, this is Michelle at East Avenue Art, and today I'm going to show you how I painted these cute little sugar cookies from Pillsbury. I just think they're the cutest little Halloween cookies. So I start with my Himi Gouache, and this is kind of a jelly gouache. I'm still getting used to using it. You can see I haven't really used too much of this, but I learned kind of a little bit about gouache before I got into it, and I felt like with these jelly gouaches, it's important not to let bacteria get into your gouache because it'll kind of ruin it. So I wish I could credit the person that I saw do this, but I don't remember who it was. But they mentioned that they spray with the Hemi spray before they start using the gouache, and then they use a palette knife like you see me doing here to pick out the colors that I want to use. And that way I'm not like dipping a wet brush in and whatever organisms are in the water. So that's kind of going to preserve my gouache, my Himi gouache, a little bit longer. And from there, I started mixing up some colors. You can see I neglected to add white, so I'm kind of just going back in with my palette knife and getting a few more colors set up as I am trying to get like the dough color for the cookies, and hopefully you're sort of familiar with these. So I played around with this. Again, I'm really just very much learning how to use gouache because this dough came out a little bit darker than I would have preferred. Sometimes it's good to avoid this mistake that I made on the front end. It's good to actually test out your colors on a swatch of paper. I've just not really been doing that lately because I'm pretty comfortable with watercolor and the watercolor's coming out the color I expect. But with gouache, it's a different medium, and so you can see I'm kind of testing out a whole different dough color there as well on the pumpkin dough. And oh, I should say, this little illustration is available on my Patreon if you want to trace it and like just use it as a coloring page, or if you'd like to attempt this gouache tutorial, that's great too. But you can find that on my Patreon, which is linked in the description. So I've added a little bit more of the white gouache, and now I'm moving on to the ghost illustration, and this is more of the color that I was looking for. I found once I guess third time's a charm, right? Once I started painting in the ghost, I was like, oh, that's what I've been looking for. And so you'll see that I try to put this color over. You can see I'm doing that right now. My initial really orangey dough, it's not fully covering it up as much as, say, if it was acrylic, but I think it toned down the oranginess of that color. And then I did the same thing with my pumpkin dough there as well. And I should mention while I have this point opportunity as well that I decided to do a couple of the candy corn Halloween candies. I don't really like those very much, but I think they're just sort of like iconic Halloween candies, and I love the colors. And so I'm going to add a little bit of like the purple that's on these sugar cookies and to fill in behind the ghost. And I just really love the colors of Halloween, like the yellows and the oranges and the purples. I think they just go together so well, and it just looks super festive. So this was a pretty simple, I was just playing around with like the blues and the purples and seeing how they blended together as I outlined around the ghost. And then one piece of advice that I think is beneficial, especially if you're new, I just move my sketchbook around, or, my paper that I'm painting on, if it's not a sketchbook, around as much as I want to get the angles that I want. Um, that's why I'm not really a person that likes painting on an easel. I like to have it, so I can manipulate the angles. And I think that really is super helpful, especially if you're just learning to paint and draw. At this stage, I'm going to start filling in the orange part of the pumpkin cookie illustration. And so I'm just kind of outlining around the face there with that orange and just getting the fun little pumpkin jack-o'-lantern face on there. And unfortunately, as I'm flipping around the sketchbook, you also see me leaning in really close, so my head keeps coming into frame. Sorry about that. Hopefully that's not too distracting. So also while I have that orange on my brush, I'm going to go in and start painting the orange part of the candy corn. And again, while I have the orange on my brush, I'm going to paint in the ghost's mouth and his eyes. And I just love that cookie. I love how the dough looks. I also like the orange and the purple on it. I just thought it was a super fun painting, and I don't know, I guess it's okay if my um, dough colors are somewhat different. I don't know if the rest of you have this experience, but oftentimes when I would bake in my old apartment, the cookies would not come out very uniformly because it was kind of an old oven. So I thought that was just like a little fun throwback. I'm also kind of like dabbing in little bits of, maybe where the dough was cooked a little bit more, or where there'd be like maybe a little bit of hole, and a little bit of the side of the cookie that you see that I'm doing on the right side to just show some shadow, where the light, I'm assuming that my light source is where you see that binder clip that's keeping my sketchbook firmly down. So that means on the other side of those cookies is where you would see sort of maybe like the dark side of the cookies, and then the shadows that I'm gonna pop in as well. And I also thought it'd be fun to do like a little star up in the upper right hand corner of that cookie, the ghost cookie, but I kind of have to go in a few more times and get that yellow to show up better against the purple, I think. I think acrylic would have done a little bit better with that than gouache, so something to keep in mind. And now I'm starting on the last cookie, which is this black cat. I love cats. I'm a crazy cat lady, and I love that this time of year is their time to shine. So I'd love to have a black cat. My cats are tabbies, and they just sort of appeared in my life. But I've heard that black cats have a harder time being adopted at the shelters, but they're apparently like really wonderful pets. So would definitely like to get a black cat at some day in the future. Um, and now I'm turning my attention over to the little stem and leaves on the pumpkin. And I looked at those Pillsbury cookies, and they have a little bit of like green inside of the eyes as well. And oh, one thing I decided to do was actually to paint that dough color around, just to kind of have a little bit more uniformity with the other cookies. And there I'm going, trying to get that color on again on the black cat cookie as well. Again, I wasn't happy with how that star was contrasting against the purple background, so I'm trying to add a little bit more of a thicker consistency to that yellow. And now I'm going in on the interior of the jack-o'-lantern, and I'm adding yellow eyes to the cat. um, and I thought it'd be fun to paint a little bit of orange onto the background of the cookie surrounding the cat, and I thought that was a really good color contrast. I was spending some time trying to decide which color would look best against the cat, and I just kind of thought, you know what, I love orange. I love Halloween orange, and it's just going to contrast really nicely with that purple on the ghost. So lots of decisions that you can make. And, I used the Pillsbury Halloween sugar cookies as an inspiration for this, but there's no rules. Like, you can sort of make it your own. And one way that I chose to do that was through the colors that I used. Okay, and just like with the ghost cookie, I'm going back in with that darker kind of shadow cookie color, and I'm putting in a little bit of where you would see maybe the, not the flat side, but the kind of the side of the cookie, where it would be, somewhat a little bit darker and not hitting the light exactly. And I just think that adds a little bit of contrast for the page. And yeah, I think that kind of gives a little bit more depth. I'm also imagining that on that pumpkin cookie that that's icing that the uh, pumpkin was on. So I'm tracing a little bit, and the same thing with the cat, just like an outline. So it gives it a sense of like shadow. So it looks a little more 3D, like that there's some icing that's sitting on top of the cookie itself, if that makes sense. That was kind of just a direction that I chose to go once I was working out the illustration. It was a little bit more interesting for me to think about it that way rather than just like that was part of the cookie design, which is I think what it is with the actual Pillsbury Halloween cookies that you can get at the store. And yeah, I thought it was cool to just add a little bit of those couple stars onto the pumpkin. And I also did the same thing a little bit later on the cat. So at this point, I mixed up a little bit of like an indigo color with a brown to create a shadow color. So I want these candies and cookies to look like they're resting on the page. And again, I'm imagining that my light source is where that binder clip is. And so, that's how the shadows would fall. I also want that pumpkin cookie to look like it's resting on the cat cookie. So that's why I drag that shadow, or why I previously dragged that shadow across the cat cookie as well, if you can see that I did that. And I think that again gives it a little bit of depth, and those cookies appear as though they are, sitting on the page. So at this juncture, I've loaded up some white gouache on my paintbrush, and I'm just gonna draw like little, hints of light reflecting. So I want to do that where I'm envisioning the frosting, which is the colors on, those are the colors on the cookies, on the cookie dough. So I'm just kind of gonna put in, yeah, some kind of consistent little dashes of white so it looks like it's reflecting. So that's like two ways that I think about light. So I've got to create a shadow, but I also have to show where the light might reflect off of the cookie as well. Okay, so I'm just about done. I think at one point I added a little bit of a light gray to the candy corns so they weren't pure white. But yeah, this is my final product, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you learned something. And go ahead and hit the follow and like button if you'd like to see more.